In August 1936, the Nazi dictatorship led by Adolf Hitler hosted the Summer Olympics, temporarily concealing its racist and militaristic tendencies. On that occasion, the regime softened its anti-Semitic policies and plans for territorial expansion, using the Games to present an image of a peaceful and tolerant Germany to numerous foreign spectators and journalists. However, athletic and Olympic organizations in the United States and other Western democracies passed up the opportunity to boycott the 1936 Olympics, which some observers at the time argued might have discouraged Adolf Hitler and strengthened international resistance to Nazi tyranny. After the Games ended, Germany continued its expansionist policies and persecution of Jews and other enemies of the state, culminating in the outbreak of World War II and the Holocaust. Stay until the end as we recount the major events, including the iconic Olympic boycott of that year. In 1931, the International Olympic Committee selected Berlin as the host city for the 1936 Summer Olympics, marking Germany's return to the global community after its isolation following defeat in World War I. 2 years later, Adolf Hitler assumed the office of Chancellor of Germany, quickly transforming the country's fragile democracy into a one-party dictatorship that persecuted Jews, Roma, and other political opponents. The Nazi authorities also sought to control sport, using the German sporting image to promote ideas of racial superiority and physical prowess. This involved idealizing the physical strength of athletes and highlighting facial features considered Aryan as part of the regime's emphasis on physical fitness, seen as necessary for military service. A total of 49 nations participated in the Berlin Olympics, compared to 37 in 1932. 5 countries made their official Olympic debut at the Games: Afghanistan, Bermuda, Bolivia, Costa Rica, and Lithuania. Here on the map, we can see the nations that participated for the first time, shown in blue, and the others in green. This other map shows the number of athletes present from the respective participating countries. We can see in particular that the United States had a very significant number, and we will see why in this video. In April 1933, an Aryans-only policy was implemented in all German sports organizations, systematically excluding Jews and Roma from German sports facilities and associations. This led to the exclusion of Jewish athletes such as boxer Erich Seelig and tennis player Daniel Prenn from participating in German sporting events. Even world-class athletes such as high jumper Gretel Bergmann were expelled from their clubs and excluded from the German Olympic team. In 1936, Jewish athletes excluded from German sports clubs grouped together in separate Jewish associations such as the Maccabi and Shield groups and used makeshift segregated facilities. However, these facilities were not comparable to the well-funded German sports organizations. In addition to Jews, Roma athletes such as boxer Johann Rukeli Trollmann were also banned from German sports. As a symbolic gesture to appease international opinion, German authorities allowed fencer Helene Meyer, whose father was Jewish, to represent Germany at the Berlin Olympics. She won the silver medal in women's individual fencing and performed the Nazi salute on the podium, as did all other German medalists. However, no other Jewish athletes represented Germany at the 1936 Summer Olympics. Despite this, 9 athletes who were Jewish or of Jewish descent won medals at the Nazi Olympics, including Meyer and 5 Hungarian athletes. In addition, 7 Jewish athletes from the United States competed in the Games. Many of these athletes were pressured by Jewish organizations to boycott the Olympics, but chose to compete for various reasons, often without fully understanding the extent and purpose of Nazi persecution of Jews and other groups. In August 1936, the Nazi regime attempted to disguise its racist policies by hosting the Summer Olympics. Anti-Semitic posters were temporarily removed, and newspapers toned down their rhetoric in line with directives from the propaganda ministry led by Joseph Goebbels. In this way, the regime used the Olympics to present a false image of a peaceful and tolerant Germany to foreign spectators and journalists. For the Summer Games, which took place from August 1st to 16th, the Nazis made extensive preparations, building a huge sports complex that included a new stadium and a state-of-the-art Olympic village. For the athletes, Berlin was decorated with Olympic flags and swastikas, creating a festive and crowded atmosphere. However, most visitors were unaware that the Nazi regime had temporarily removed anti-Jewish posters from the city and had conducted police raids on the Roma population. On July 16, 1936, some 800 Roma were arrested and interned in a special camp in Marzahn, outside Berlin. In addition, Nazi authorities ensured that foreign visitors were not subject to laws criminalizing homosexual relations in Germany, specifically paragraph 175. The opening of the Games on August 1st, 1936, was marked by the presence of Adolf Hitler. A musical fanfare conducted by the famous composer Richard Strauss announced the dictator's arrival before a large German crowd. Hundreds of athletes representing teams from all over the world paraded into the stadium, introducing a new Olympic ritual. A lone runner carried the Olympic torch, which had traveled in a relay from the site of the ancient games in Olympia, Greece. "49 athletic teams from all over the world competed in the Berlin Games, the largest number ever recorded at one Olympics. Germany fielded the largest team, consisting of 348 athletes, followed by the United States with 312 members, including 18 African Americans. The American delegation was led by Avery Brundage, president of the United States Olympic Committee. The Soviet Union decided not to participate in the Berlin Games, a decision that would remain in place until the Helsinki Games in 1952, when the Cold War was at its height. Nazi Germany promoted the Olympics with skillful propaganda, utilizing colorful posters and magazine covers. The emphasis on athletic imagery established a connection between Germany and ancient Greece, reinforcing the Nazi racial myth that the superior German civilization was the rightful heir to classical culture from antiquity. This emphasized ideal Aryan racial types, portraying heroes with blonde hair, blue eyes, and finely chiseled features. German propaganda continued after the Games with the release of the controversial documentary Olympia, directed by Leni Riefenstahl in 1938. Riefenstahl, best known for her previous propaganda film Triumph of the Will, which depicted Nazi party rallies in Nuremberg, was hired by the regime to produce this film about the 1936 Summer Olympics. Before moving on to the next topic, don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed the content. Over 80 years ago, heated debates surrounded the Olympics, relating them to issues of human rights and international politics. The 2022 scenario draws striking parallels to that episode, as there has been ongoing discussion about a possible boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, China, in response to human rights abuses. To understand the complexity of these situations, it is essential to examine the context, the arguments for and against Olympic boycotts, their impacts, and the lessons learned from past events. The 1936 Nazi Olympics in Berlin were marked by a series of ethical and political challenges, with many calling for an international boycott. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, consolidating the Nazi regime and imposing an ideology of world supremacy that resulted in the systematic persecution of ethnic and religious minorities, especially Jews. Against this backdrop, the debate over participation in the Olympics became a global issue. Politicians, civil rights groups, university presidents, newspapers, labor organizations, and several state legislatures and city councils in the United States were unanimous in citing the persecution of Jews as a reason for not attending the Berlin Games. The justification for the boycott was based on ethical principles, with calls for nations to refuse to compete in an event hosted by a country that routinely violated human rights. The central argument was that the Olympics could not be separated from political reality and that the international community had a moral duty to denounce and condemn the atrocities committed in Nazi Germany. However, amidst the calls for a boycott, arguments against mixing sports and politics also emerged. Some argued that the Olympics should be a neutral ground where athletes from all over the world could compete based on sporting merit. Regardless of political issues, they believed that denying athletes the opportunity to participate would be unfair, as they had prepared and trained for years to represent their countries. Furthermore, there were concerns that boycotting the Olympics would not lead to real change in German policy and would instead harm the athletes themselves. The boycott issue reached its peak with a decisive vote in December 1935, conducted by the Amateur Athletic Union of the United States. The vote nearly resulted in a boycott, but in the end, a majority voted in favor of participating in the Berlin Olympics. Amid the discussions about Olympic boycotts, a few notable voices raised the issue of racial treatment in the United States. During the 1930s, the United States was still deeply marked by racial segregation, with so-called Jim Crow laws in effect in the southern states, segregating black and white citizens in virtually every area of society. Additionally, many professional sports leagues were all white, excluding black athletes from participation. This dynamic created a dilemma for boycott advocates. Some African Americans pointed out the hypocrisy of boycotting the Olympics due to persecution in Germany, while the United States had its own history of racial discrimination. The fight for equal rights in the United States, albeit in a different context, was also a legitimate struggle. The role of then-President of the United States Olympic Committee, Avery Brundage, in advocating for American participation in the 1936 Olympics is another critical point in this historical episode. An industrialist and conservative, Brundage was an ardent supporter of participation in the Games, to the point of making anti-Semitic remarks, calling the anti-Olympic campaign a Jewish communist conspiracy. His stance led to accusations from some American newspapers that he was a Nazi stooge. The Nazi government was determined to secure United States participation in the Olympics, seeing the event as an opportunity to improve its international image and establish diplomatic appeal. To allay concerns about the treatment of Jews in Germany, Nazi authorities invited Brundage to visit the country in 1934. During his stay, he received VIP treatment and concluded that Jewish athletes were being treated fairly, arguing in favor of continuing participation. This episode highlights how political and diplomatic considerations can influence participation in the Olympics. Pressure from foreign governments and concerns about international image can lead to decisions that run counter to fundamental ethical principles. The case of Avery Brundage also illustrates how personal and ideological interests can affect decisions with implications far beyond the world of sports. Jeremiah Mahoney, who succeeded Brundage as president of the Amateur Athletic Union in 1934, played a significant role in the fight for the boycott. He was a Democrat and former New York City mayor, known for his opposition to racial and religious discrimination. Mahoney and other boycott advocates argued that Nazi Germany sought not simply to involve the United States in a sporting event, but also to bolster its economy with US dollars and gain political support from the United States. This exemplifies how the Olympic boycott was seen not just as a sports issue, but as part of a broader political and economic strategy. The clash between Brundage and Mahoney symbolized the divisions within the US Olympic movement on the issue of the boycott. The two came from opposing political aisles, with Brundage, a conservative Republican, and Mahoney, a progressive Democrat. The December 1935 vote by the Amateur Athletic Union was a turning point in the boycott debate. The victory of those in favor of participation sealed the fate of the US Olympic team. It is worth noting, however, that the AAU played a crucial role as it was responsible for certifying Olympic athletes and teams. Had the vote favored a boycott, US participation in the Olympics would have been highly unlikely. The German government was deeply concerned that the United States would withdraw its team from the Olympics due to pressure from the American Jewish community and other groups. The British ambassador to Germany at the time, Sir Eric Phipps, reported that Hitler was very interested in the Olympics and that the German government feared the impact of a possible American boycott. As the boycott battle unfolded, international public opinion was also affected. Brief calls for a boycott emerged in countries such as Great Britain, Canada, France, Sweden, Czechoslovakia, and the Netherlands. However, these countries ultimately followed the AAU's decision and participated in the Berlin Games. The 1936 Summer Olympics were held with 49 nations participating, and no nation ended up boycotting the event. Spain was the exception due to the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, and the Soviet Union opted not to compete. While the United States sent a large delegation of competitors, including 18 black athletes, a Nazi newspaper described them in a disparaging manner. However, the Nazi regime conducted itself relatively well during the Games, scoring a propaganda victory. A New York Times report praised the Berlin Olympics as the largest and best organized up to that time. The White House did not get involved in the debate over whether to boycott the Games. In contrast to President Jimmy Carter's later decision to boycott the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the 1980 Olympic boycott failed to achieve its goal of pressuring the Soviets to leave Afghanistan. The stories of athletes whose Olympic hopes were crushed by the boycott, coupled with the subsequent absence of Soviet and Communist bloc athletes from the 1984 Los Angeles Games, had a profound effect on the idea of boycotting the Olympics again. This explains why the American campaign to avoid attending the Beijing Olympics was not as intense as the 1936 effort. Germany emerged victorious from the Berlin Olympics, with its athletes winning the most medals. German organization and hospitality received praise from visitors. Most newspaper reports suggested that the Games had reintegrated Germany into the international scene and even humanized Germans anew. Few, however, realized, as American journalist William Shirer did, that Berlin's glamour disguised a racist and oppressive regime. Shortly after the Games, Adolf Hitler continued his plans for German expansion, and the persecution of Jews resumed just 2 days after the end of the Olympics. Captain Wolfgang Fürstner, head of the Olympic Village, committed suicide after being dismissed from military service due to his Jewish ancestry. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering World War II, just 3 years after the Olympic Games. I'm going to place here on the screen the medal table of the 12 nations that won the most medals at the 1936 Games. You can check the medal table on the following website. If you think this video helped you in some way, please subscribe to the channel. FASVIM series. See you soon.